Now we have a luxury here at WHS because we get to interview and talk to, with Kevin Smith, Dylan, myself, it'll be approximately 250 clients this year. Joe Youngblood out of Michigan is working with us now. I would say between the four of us, we'll hit 300 clients this year. Joe's schedule's been filling up fast. Kevin's already booked about 30 clients in the last month. Joe's been booking clients for a week, and he's up to 10 plus clients just in a week's time. And so I know between all of us, we'll book quite a few, and we turn away a lot. So if you want one of those guys, Dylan, your schedule's full, right?
Yep.
For the rest of the year. Mine's full for the rest of the year, meaning I'll start scheduling for next season, which will be for me December through September in pretty specific areas. I'll start doing that midsummer time, somewhere around there. But Joe and Kevin are filling up fast. I know Kevin will probably be full by May, and Joe might be too. The bottom line is we get to interview people, every client, and talk to them about food plots. I started writing about planting food plots for the Quality Whitetails magazine back in 2004, Michigan Out of Doors before that, speaking about it, having habitat days on my property, and experimenting with food plots long before some of these mixes, for example, Clover and Brassica, the buckwheat, no-till, and mixing lots of different seed types 2 decades ago or more. So between that and our client experience, one of the things about clients is we talk to them and this works, this doesn't. And we start to see a pattern of why one will work in one area. For example, sorghum in non-ag northern areas where they don't have a lot of food left, it might be an okay option, but there's better options. And so we get to see this progression of fads and different types of buzzword seeds that come along that people buy, that we've been experimenting and playing around with for years. For example, canola and kale. We know that deer don't eat those readily unless that's all they have. So if you plant that up north, there's a lot of wilderness and wooded area, you'll see deer hit those products. And a lot of times the good thing is those are a small percentage of the mix. And then you work on those, people experiment, and then they get rid of them. But we learned 12 years ago, 15 years ago, when I've been working with clients, that I can't tell you how many canola and kale fields I've seen standing. And they're the long white stems in the mixes. John Comp added a little bit, I believe it was canola or kale, so excuse me if I'm wrong, but a little bit in the mix last year. I believe we're getting that out this year, but it's something that will give you a high volume. It's just not eaten by deer. And so we figured this out 12, 14 years ago or more. And I don't want to see you guys with some of these products right here get sucked into the mix, because say for example, canola or kale, if that's something that shouldn't be in a Brassica mix, but it's only 10% of the mix, 15% of the mix, well, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And some northern areas, they'll eat it. Where some of these products are just going to fail right from the beginning, and it's going to be a major failure. And that's what we try to keep our clients from doing, and we try to convey that to you guys. And this even applies to staging areas too, where you have staging area in a bag or mixes. This is what you plant for a staging area. Well, in the case of the staging area is made because of the habitat. It's the last safe form of cover before deer step out into a food source. It's typically where does bed. It's not someplace you want to hide. Sure, you're going to find lots of sign, rub, scrapes, and deer trails coming into it, but if you go in there, you often ruin the whole movement from food source to bedding area. There are staging areas where you can get to and just hunt barely on the edge and watch deer pass by, but you have to really good downwind protection and access to that location so you're not exposed getting in and out, and often that is not the case. So there's not something you can actually plant in a staging area and say, well, this is going to make it better. There's so much more to that, and it's a lot more complex. Bedding areas are the same thing. You need structure. If you have enough cover to actually plant and be a bedding area, then you're not going to have any kind of browse or food within that bedding area, or enough to be appreciable that it really even matters. So bedding area, you have to have structure. That's why we look at straight switchgrass in most areas, especially in the north third to half of the country. When you get down into West Virginia, Kentucky, over into southern Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, you can get away with more prairie grasses, southern Indiana even southern Pennsylvania, down into Virginia. Certainly when you get down to Louisiana, over into the southeast, over to Oklahoma. Oklahoma even gets cold. You look at, there's areas where if you get snow, you get wet snow, a lot of those grasses, it doesn't matter if they're native in that area, like big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, they fall over and it gets smashed down. Sometimes that happens early in December. November even up north, and you're not left with any structure. So you have to have bedding structure in a bedding area, whether that's red cedar, conifer, switchgrass. And so we're looking at what can you use to fit that gives deer that bedding structure where they can actually have lasting cover, not only through the hunting season, but typically into the wintertime and through the wintertime too. So when you get down south, that could be a native grass blend, and it'll give you a good mix. It'll stand strong and deer can live in it. But when you get into Central Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and North, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, upstate Pennsylvania, Vermont, New Hampshire, you have to have more switchgrass. Now, if you mix switchgrasses, I'm talking about bad mixes, whether you're mixing forbs and forages in there, if you have enough switchgrass and you have enough cover, then you won't have forbs and forages. If you have enough forbs and forages in the mix, then you won't have enough cover. And that could apply to even native grass blends. If you have mixes where it dilutes the amount of cover because you're offering forages in the form of alfalfa, clover, then it's going to dilute the cover enough that the cover lays down, or it's not appreciable enough in November, December. And it's the same thing. That's why we advocate switchgrass here, pollinators or early successional growth, or box elder, red maple seeds, shrubs like from our big rock trees friends. We look at those separate. Out here in my property here, I have separate plantings of long strips, 250 to 300 yards of pollinator blends flanked by switchgrass, so that the pheasants and birds and rabbits and deer have both cover and browse in the same location. You need to separate those two out. It's no different than a bad mix. I'll tell you, one that's not even on here is a screening blend, where if you have food varieties in there that are eaten, your screening hangs down. That's why we like the HD screening blend from John Compton, Northwoods Whitetails. And I'm not just saying that. A lot of people say, well, we'll recommend this mix or this planting, but they don't tell you why. The why is they get sponsored and they get free stuff, and they don't even know how it relates or if it's good. John Compton's Northwood Screening Blend is good because it does what it's supposed to. It's a screening mix. It's a screening planting. It'll get up to 15 feet tall. I like to plant it thicker. Later, it gets a little shorter, but it's very dense. You can't mix screening blend with switchgrass, for example. If you have enough screening blend for it to offer a screen for the given year, it's an annual, then it shades out the switchgrass and kills it. If you have enough switchgrass in the mix and too little H2 screening blend or screening blend to actually kill the switch, then it's not a screening blend, it's not a screening product, it's actually not screening your approach or access. It doesn't have an appreciable amount of that annual blend in there. So one dilutes the other, you can't mix them. You have to plant them side by side. I'm showing you a clip right now that I picked up at a client property of mine where he planted the whole thing in switch just because he didn't realize how wide he was planting it. And then he planted HG screening blend down the middle, and you can look, it was a great screen. And it's still, we're looking at this videos from early March with lots of snow and crusty snow on it, so still standing pretty appreciably. It's withstood a lot of weather, wind, and you can see the switchgrass on both sides that is poking out through the snow. So he's going to have a great screening of switchgrass. He might plant the HD screening blend again for 1 year. But bottom line is, when you walk into the screening blend, you can see within a foot that switchgrass is gone completely. And that's because the HD screening blend was effective enough that it offered a true screen, it shaded out the switch and killed it. So you can't mix those two. So it should be added to the list. But as going back to bedding mixes again, you can't mix forbs and forages with your grasses. That actual structure, no different than mixing forbs and forages with red cedar planting or spruce planting. It's the same thing. And you also can't mix a variety of tall and short grasses. So someone might have a short variety switchgrass with a tall variety. That doesn't matter if it's switchgrass, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass. The tall grass shades out the shorter varieties, and that especially applies with switchgrass, which can't stand any competition. So when you have switchgrass that's 8 feet tall, 7 feet tall, and you have shorter varieties 3 to 4 feet tall, and people say, well, that makes the stand stiffer. What it does is the tall varieties shade out the short varieties and kill it. It doesn't matter if it's the same species or not. So really be wary when it comes to bedding area mixes, but let's dive into food plots because more people are planting food plots than bedding areas. And Dylan's giving me the 10-minute sign right now, so that means I need to wrap it up, or is that, we don't even have a bet going right now, so I'll try to be efficient. Dylan wants to get on the road today, so at least he didn't give me the angry look, so it's good. But Okay, number 2, brassicas and cereal grains. This is a big one. I just got a question on this morning. A lot of these, I see these comments over and over again. Dylan, Kevin, Joe, or I get these questions, and then we want to respond. And so one of my best responses is a lot of videos. These are the questions that people are asking at the moment. We create videos right now and deliver them and put them out. Right now it's March 14th. So whenever you're seeing this video, it's going to be pretty quick. And we try to give you current information for what's going on in the whitetail world and industry and hunting. Brassica and cereal grains. For one, they should be planted about 4 to 6 weeks apart. I want to repeat that, 4 to 6 weeks apart. I first started mixing cereal grains with brassicas back in the early 2000s, end of 90s, right around there. That's when I first started using brassica. Quickly realized by doing this wrong that you put brassica in the mix, the wheat or rye turns the brassica yellow, red, it's nutrient starved, and the wheat and rye, and especially rye, has properties where it helps eliminate weeds or compete weeds, actually reduce weeds. It's a great smother crop. And so when you mix those two, it's actually fighting and taking from the brassica to the point where the brassica ends up offering very little. Now sometimes there's a small amount of wheat or rye in the mix, but then the wheat or rye gets so tall that it's not offering any attraction if it's even light within the mix. Brassica should be planted in most areas in the upper Midwest right around August 1st to middle of August, maybe middle of August down towards southern Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and then you get to the UP of Michigan. If you can get away with it and you have enough range, plant that. Northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, upstate New York, more like July 15th if you have appreciable rains. So there's a window right there. If you're planting your cereal grains on August 1st in your area, that's a perfect area. Let's say central lower Michigan, central Wisconsin, northern Pennsylvania, over into Minnesota. If you're planting August 1st, August 10th, you should be planting your cereal grains around Labor Day. If you plant that too early, not only outcompetes, takes from the nutrients, ruins the attractiveness and volume of the brassica, but it gets too tall. So if you plant the brassicas around Labor Day in those areas, you're going to get stunted brassicas that amount to nothing. In the first month of brassica growth, it'll grow typically 6 inches, 7 inches, 8 inches, where in the second and third month, if you allow it to go that long, it'll grow 12 to 15 inches. So when you don't plant on time, I'll go to many properties, northern Michigan. That's a big time I go in April to Michigan. I'll look at stunted brassicas in the field, and you can almost always say, did you plant these in September? And 90% of the time the answer is yes. Because they didn't sacrifice, they're planting about 6 weeks late in an area like that. What they sacrificed, not the 10 inches on the front side that it should have grown, or 12 inches in a month and a half. What they're sacrificing is the 12 to 15 inches should have grown on the last month, let alone in the last 6 weeks. It should grow 15 to 18 inches in most areas. So that's why it's this big. It should have been 18 inches, 20 inches in that area where it's northern, you don't have as long as a growing season, but it only grew this much because it grew, got a frost the third week of September, and that's all the higher it's going to get in those first 2 weeks. And that's why you don't mix the two. Brassica should be planted earlier, wheat rye should be planted later. Even if you planted a standalone wheat rye crop in early August in some of those areas, it's going to be too tall, stemmy, dormant. It turns into a field. It heads out. It's not attractive except in the most unusual circumstances, meaning there's no food, big wilderness area, and they might eat it, kind of like sorghum that we'll talk about later. Very bad mix. And so people ask me why. I had a question this morning. I see people in their mixes mixing wheat, rye, oats with brassica. There's 2 reasons they do that. They're either trying to take your money because they see buzzwords, rye, brassicas, just they're putting that blend together, trying to suck your money out, or they just simply, which I think this is the case a lot, they simply don't have the experience level that's needed to produce the mixes they're putting in, because if they did, they wouldn't plant those two together. And that's the majority of seed mixes out there in seed companies, unfortunately. That's why we go through John Compton Northwoods Whitetails. We talk about all these blends and mixes. And even if John wants to add something, you look at it and say, you know what, I don't think it's going to work, but it's not going to take from that planting. And so John and I talk about that all the time, different varieties of switchgrass he's trying to get a hold of right now just to fill that need for people. Will this be good? Will that be good? What areas? We have good conversations about that, where a lot of seed companies simply don't care. John wants to do what's best. A lot of seed, and he'll take the steps to do so, or a lot of seed companies, they might even want to do what's best, but they don't have enough experience to know better or not. We started mixing these I did back in the early 2000s, and it's not a good idea. And then when you have these conversations with 1,000+ clients over the years, you can see what mixes work, what don't. And so that's a big one to avoid. And that tells you about a seed company. Think about that. Kind of like if you see that they're putting that mix together, like with a lot of these, even the bedding in a bag, you have to wonder about every other product they sell. Every other product they sell is suspect. It's a bad thing. Number 3, rye grass. That's a simple one. If it has rye grass in it, we'll skip over this quick. Rye grass is not rye grain. Fall rye, annual rye is not the same as a perennial rye grass. Rye grass looks like the lawn. There's some places where you have excessive deer numbers. I would say, I've heard of properties in Mississippi, Louisiana, where that ryegrass will stay green and productive all year. You can mow it like a lawn and deer will eat it. You know why? Because it's highly overpopulated with deer. And it's something that will withstand grazing pressures, unlike clover. So in an area like that, it could work. And that's why if we were down in Mississippi, Louisiana, and there were high deer numbers, very high, and they don't have a lot of food plot space, ryegrass might be an opportunity to plant, because even though it's average nutrition, it's something that can withstand grazing pressure, and it's going to be growing in December and January because it's warm enough. So even some of these that might not work, or we'd recommend, like ryegrass, does have its place somewhere. But in the majority of the country, 95% of the country, if you have ryegrass in the mix, I'd number the states, but it's almost all of them, except some of those extreme southern cases, ryegrass is bad. There's something else that can be added. It's just taking from your mix. It's taking from whatever else it's added to. It doesn't matter if it's peas, beans, for late planted peas and beans, wheat, rye, brassica, clover. It's taking, not adding when it's in a mix. Number 4, kitchen sink blends. What I mean by that, let's throw all the buzzwords in there. Peas, beans, brassicas, grains, cereal grains, like I talk about, wheat, rye, and oats, sugar beets. Let's just throw it all in there. Because if you put this kitchen sink, and someone will say, well, that means part of it, it'll grow well in this area, and then those other areas will be diminished. And so this part will grow well, this part will grow well. And we want to do a lot better than that. We expect a lot more, not only from our clients, but from you guys too. I don't want to plant a 1 acre field to get a 1/4 acre because 3/4 of it was inappropriate or not enough in the mix. And so when you're putting these mixes together, one thing's taking from another. I can tell you for a fact, because I started doing this over 20 years ago, clover is great to mix with brassica. I started mixing clover with brassica in '99. There was no other products that had clover and brassica together at that time commercially. It seemed like a good mix because the soil extension agent, Jim Islip up in the UP, told me one would not take from the other. Just like brassicas and peas or beans, they don't take from each other, but that doesn't mean they need to be mixed all the time. We sometimes recommend that, and I'll talk about that in a second. The bottom line is, when you're putting wheat, rye, peas, beans, clover, brassica in a mix, it's called a kitchen sink blend, and it might be any combination, big combination of those, and it's a bad mix. It's just, again, you see buzzwords. You go through a seed label and you say, sugar beets, peas. Even though they're not going to be appreciable, there's not enough in there to amount to anything, and then you buy it because it sucked your money and your dollars. That's the majority of seed companies out there, unfortunately. Number 5, too little of peas and sugar beets. A standalone pea planting is 300 pounds per acre. When you have 7 pounds per acre in a mix, not enough. That's when I talk about mixing these. I talk about 100 pounds of peas per acre, 50 pounds of beans. You're planting those late. They're not going to take up the field. That's why you still have room to add rye later and add rye in that mix. But you don't, peas and beans you plant mid-July to mid-August. You don't plant those in September. You plant cereal grains in September sometime. So even then you don't mix the two, meaning you don't mix it on that initial planting. You add it later. And that gives you the perfect timing for those. Sugar beets. Again, buzzword. You see it, they put it in a mix, you buy it because you heard it was good. Bad to do, because sugar beets should be planted a month to 2 months earlier than the other brassicas in the mix. So you end up with no sugar beets. Deer typically graze them aggressively when they're growing. And it could even, if they're eating those brassica or sugar beets within the mix, let's just say in theory they love those sugar beets, which they do when they're growing and they're young, once they develop a taste for them, they could destroy a brassica crop because they're trying to pick out those other sugar beets that are in there, and they're putting an excessive amount of grazing pressure on that brassica plat because the sugar beets are in there, because the peas are in there, because the beans are in there. That's why you don't mix them. Now, if you do mix, like an area where the deer aren't readily eating brassica and you need to establish a pattern of use with the brassica, you can add 50 pounds of peas per acre, 25 pounds of beans. You're sweetening the brassica mix. We do that and recommend that sometimes depending on the circumstance, but not all the time. And that's where a lot of these seed mixes fail, because you buy this bag, they say it works everywhere. And that's just not true. I've even heard cold hardy oats. I had someone get a hold of me and they even showed me the seed label. You can plant those in November in northern Wisconsin. No, you can't. They should have been planted sometime in late August to September 1st at the latest, because once you get a frost, it immediately kills it. It starts to turn brown within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you need to be aware of that, even though it says on the bag that it's great to plant in November, in late October, in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan. That's a big, big no-no. So you really have to watch those buzzwords that are in the mix. You have to ask yourself, is this an appreciable amount? Which 7 pounds per acre on peas, or 10 pounds or 15 pounds is not. And then also when it comes to things like sugar beets, is this going to be appreciable in the mix? Are the deer going to recognize it? You paid more for the mix because it was there. It was a buzzword that sucked your money out. Number 6, sorghum in blends. And we could say number 7 because we can back up to not mixing screening blends with switchgrass. That's not going to work. Some people were advocating that a few years ago. We tried that out a long time ago. Didn't work. Wasn't a good idea. I can remember we even went to the point where the switchgrass was already a foot tall. And let's say that was in July, and we're putting our screening blend in there. No one will get a little bit shorter. And then we found the switchgrass only lived into about a foot. So we had this beautiful stand of switchgrass. We put the screening blend in thinking, well, it's already established, and then it just dies on the inside. And so then when people recommend that, you can see, well, they haven't followed up with those recommendations, because it actually hurts people and wastes some money. So sorghum and blends. Sorghum is a low value cover crop. Sorghum is meant for birds. It's great, the seed head for birds. And whether it's quail, songbirds, whatever it might be, it's got a seed head, smaller seed, perfect for birds. For birds. Again, I'll repeat, for birds. It's not something that's typically planted for deer. For example, up north in a northern Wisconsin setting, someone will try corn, they eat it down to the dirt before July, because there's nothing else available. So then they plant sorghum and it lives and makes it to the season. Maybe there's not a lot of deer in the area. It's a wilderness area, there's not a lot of food. So you'll find that they might eat it in October, November. It actually made it and actually withstood that. I can tell you right now though, if they're gonna browse corn in your area, there's about a 95% chance they're gonna browse sorghum too and eat it down to the dirt. So sorghum works in a very limited area, but it's not that attractive, doesn't offer a lot of browse. It does stand up to snow, so that's one good thing. But if you can get brassica to grow in there, if you can use layered rye, you're putting 100 pounds down mid-August, another 100 pounds 3 weeks later, another 100 pounds. You can even look up layered rye on Google. You can see what I wrote about long ago of how that works and why I first started doing that. You can also plant brassica. If it starts to get browse, you can put the rye over the top in those northern areas. You can plan on that. You can plan on adding the layer rye. So then you have this attractive green blend that's there for the entire season, as opposed to sorghum that might be early attraction, a late attraction. But let's face it, most of those areas, you need to actually define a pattern of use early, August, September, sometime on your plots. And then you need to hold that attraction level through the end of the season and later. If you have holes in there of attraction, let's say sorghum worked in the early season, meaning September, let's say it worked in December, what about October, November? That's when you actually mold and shape and define and grow and create a quality herd. If you're food source, I've even seen people like with soybeans. Well, they're great. They're standing in late December. I suck all the deer at that time. But you didn't in September, October, November. So you didn't get to grow a deer herd, mold, protect, shape in any way. You're just getting the leftovers. That's why you don't want these holes in nutrition. You want to have consistency. That's why a lot of times we're planting a Brassica blend here, a cereal grain blend over here. That's why we're planting peas and beans and maybe even a little tillage radish early. Then we're adding that rye to it, or wheat 6 weeks later, 4 weeks later, depending on the timing of the first planting. Because you're looking at, people say, well, when should I plant a mix? Like clover, for example. Clover is appropriate to plant with brassica. Clover is appropriate to plant with wheat, rye, and oats. I've done that too, decades ago. You always look at the annual. What's the annual timing? For example, oats, wheat, and rye. If I'm mixing clover, I'm planting that around Labor Day. If you're mixing clover, which you can do with Brassica, I'm allowing the Brassica to dictate that annual. When you plant the clover, that means you plant the Brassica blend in early August. Again, notice they're 4 to 6 weeks apart with those cereal grains and clover. I just want to help you guys save money. I want to help you save money, time. We already figured this out sometimes decades ago. Just trying to give you that experience and make sure you have a successful deer season. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but these areas right here are not ways to accomplish your goals. And instead, they're going to waste your resources of time and money. So when you head to your fields, when you head to your stores, when you head to online to order this stuff this year, make sure you're watching out for some of these because they will really hurt you in the end. I remember we did a video a while ago about Rye Grass. I was back in Coon Valley, and I think I showed taking a big divot with a golf club, 5-iron or something, I don't remember. But that's about what rye grass is good for. And I don't golf. Maybe a lot of you do. I golf sometimes, I'll take that back. But when it comes to deer, and it comes doing it right, make sure, like sorghum for birds, that you're tailoring your planting specifically for deer and what they need the most, whether it's bedding or food plots. And I hope this list helps you going out into this season in 2022. Folks, I want to make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to 93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.